He had everything a man could kill for: power, wealth, fear in every name that spoke his. But one morning, Salvatore Rizzo looked into the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. The blood on his hands no longer made him feel strong. It made him feel empty. So he did the one thing no mafia boss had ever done before. He planned his own disappearance. But what he didn't know was that the plan meant to reveal true loyalty, would also expose the deepest betrayal of his life, and lead him into the arms of the one woman whose love could either save him or destroy him. If you're already hooked by this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, so you never miss another love, betrayal, and redemption story like this one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing how far our little storytelling family reaches across the world. The night was too quiet for a man like Salvatore Rizzo. In the past, silence had meant victory, a city subdued, an empire in order. Now, it only felt like guilt pressing against the walls. The rain slid down his penthouse windows like slow tears, tracing the outline of a kingdom he no longer wanted. Below, the lights of the city blinked like dying embers. Once, every one of those streets had bowed to his name. Every gun, every secret, every whispered debt belonged to him. But tonight, all he felt was the weight of ghosts. The faces of men he'd buried, the lives he'd bought, the families he'd broken in the name of order. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and watched it tremble in his hand. He was shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. There was no thrill left in the violence, no satisfaction in control. He had everything, and still, the nights got longer. When Vince, his right-hand man, entered, Salvatore didn't turn. Vince's boots echoed softly on the marble floor. "Boss," Vince said quietly. "The shipment from Palermo's handled? No trouble." "Good," Salvatore murmured. His reflection stared back at him, older than he remembered. "You should sleep," Vince offered. "You've been—" "Don't," Salvatore interrupted. "Don't tell me to sleep. I've been sleeping for years, just not living." Vince hesitated. He had seen the boss angry, ruthless, even broken. But this was different. This was surrender flickering behind the eyes of a man who once ruled the night. Salvatore finally turned toward him. "Tell me something, Vince. When you look at me, what do you see?" Vince blinked, confused. "I see my boss, the man who built everything." Salvatore smiled, small, tired, almost human. "That's the problem." He dismissed him with a wave. When the door closed, the silence returned. Heavier this time. The empire no longer felt like a throne. It felt like a cage. Every territory he'd fought to protect was now another wall keeping him from the man he used to be. He walked through the corridors lined with portraits of dead allies and fallen enemies, each one a reminder that power only ever bought loyalty for as long as fear lasted. In his private study, he opened a drawer. Inside lay a stack of letters, unopened, unmailed, each addressed to the same name, Virginia Rossi, or as he called her, Veggie, the only woman who'd ever asked him if he slept well at night. He had met her in a flower shop months ago, a quiet place where no one called him boss. She had smiled at him as though she saw through the sharp suit and the scars. She'd treated him like a man, not a monster. That memory alone had been enough to make him linger there, buying flowers he never sent. He touched one of the envelopes and exhaled. Maybe that was why he couldn't keep going. Maybe he wanted to find out what peace felt like, what love could be when it wasn't built on fear. The sound of thunder rolled over the city and the lights flickered. A fitting metaphor, he thought. The storm always comes before the quiet. He picked up his phone and called the accountant. "Start shutting things down," he said. "Boss?" "You heard me. One shipment at a time. No noise, no headlines." There was a long pause on the other end. "And what about the rivals? Dante won't—" "I'll handle Dante," he cut in sharply, but then softened. "He's just another man who thinks the throne matters." He ended the call, feeling the first strange peace in years. Later, when he stepped onto the balcony, the air smelled of rain and steel. The city pulsed below, alive, unaware that its king was stepping down. He imagined what it would be like to walk away, to live without bodyguards or blood, to hear laughter that wasn't nervous, to sit somewhere nobody knew his name. For the first time, the idea didn't feel impossible. It felt necessary. Inside, he poured another drink and stared at the ring on his finger. A family crest, once a badge of pride. He slipped it off and set it on the desk. The metal was cold, lifeless, like the man he'd become. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm done." The words hung in the air, fragile but final. A knock came at the door. Vince again. "Boss, Dante's moving. He's been asking questions about your roots, your women." Salvatore's lips curved faintly. Let him ask. Soon enough, there'll be nothing left for him to find. He walked past Vince, down the corridor, toward the elevator. Every step felt lighter, like chains were falling away. But deep down, he knew the world he'd built would not let him go quietly. Men like him didn't just retire. They vanished in coffins or disappearances. Still, he had made up his mind. He would find a way to leave, to vanish into peace, not power. He would sell his businesses, settle his debts, and disappear into a country where no one knew his sins. As the elevator doors slid shut, his reflection caught the faint glint of the city behind him, gold and gray, alive and rotting, his empire, his prison. He whispered again, as if promising the ghosts watching him, "This ends with me." The night drew to a close with a strange serenity. Below, a black car waited. The same car that once carried orders of death, now carrying a man ready to be reborn. Salvatore climbed in, the rain still tapping on the glass like a heartbeat. He thought of Virginia, her quiet eyes, her questions, her voice that never trembled even when she teased the most feared man in the city. Maybe she'd never know what he felt. Maybe that was for the best. Still, the thought of her lingered. For the first time, he wondered what life would feel like if someone loved him without the fear, without the crown. He looked out at the streets he'd ruled and said softly, "If I ever find that kind of love, I'll never come back." The car drove on, disappearing into the fog. The king fading into the night. Have you ever chased something for so long that once you finally had it, it felt empty? Tell me in the comments. What do you think Salvatore is truly looking for now? The morning broke heavy and gray, pressing down on the city like a warning. From the top floor of the Rizzo Tower, Salvatore watched the skyline stretch across the horizon, a kingdom he no longer wanted to rule. The air smelled of metal and regret. Down below, the world pulsed with life, unaware that its most feared man was growing weary of his own crown. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling through the half-light, and thought of the 3 women who occupied the quiet corners of his life, 3 mirrors reflecting the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. None of them knew about the others. None knew they were part of his final reckoning. The first was Lana. Beautiful. Spoiled. A vision carved from champagne and diamonds. He had met her at a gallery event years ago, she in a red dress, he surrounded by bodyguards. She had caught his attention not because she feared him, but because she didn't. Lana was the kind of woman who spoke as if the world existed to admire her. She loved expensive things, but most of all, she loved being seen beside him, the infamous Salvatore Rizzo. To her, power was perfume, and she bathed in it without shame. Their affair had always been one of convenience, hers for comfort, his for distraction. When she laughed, it was the sound of crystal breaking. When she kissed him, it was to mark her territory. Salvatore had long known what she wanted, not his heart but his name, the one whispered in every corner of the city with equal fear and fascination. Then there was Camille, seductive, intelligent, dangerous in the quiet way that snakes are, beautiful until they strike. She moved with the precision of someone who always thought 2 steps ahead, Her voice carried calm, her touch, calculation. To most, she seemed loyal, devoted, almost protective of him. But Salvatore had lived too long in deceit not to recognize the glint of secrets behind her eyes. He had met her when his world was unraveling, a time when alliances shifted and enemies multiplied. Camille had appeared like a gift from the smoke, offering comfort, warmth, and whispers of understanding. She played the perfect role, but there were nights when Salvatore caught her watching him too closely, as if memorizing his habits. He never confronted her. Part of him admired the audacity. If she was a spy, she was the best he'd ever seen. And finally, Virginia, or Veggie, as he called her, the name born of affection and irony. She was nothing like the others. Industrious, quiet, soft-spoken. She came into his world like an unexpected melody. She worked at a modest flower shop across the street from one of his safe houses, unaware at first who he was. She sold him white tulips, not knowing the man who bought them had once buried enemies beneath gardens just like hers. Salvatore found peace in her presence, the kind that frightened him because it felt real. She never asked about his money, his cars, or his men. She asked about his sleepless nights, his headaches, his silence. She saw through him, and for a man like Salvatore, that was both terrifying and sacred. Each woman offered something different. Lana offered beauty and status. Camille offered danger and control. Virginia offered something none of the others could: humanity. Still, Salvatore was not a man of dreams. He was a man of proof. And before he vanished from the world that had consumed him, he needed to know the truth. He sat in his office that afternoon, the curtains half drawn, rain painting the windows. Vince stood by the door, reading his face carefully. "Something on your mind, boss?" Salvatore exhaled slowly, watching the smoke drift toward the ceiling. "3 things. 3 women, Vince. And I need to know which one of them would still be here if all this disappeared tomorrow." Vince frowned. "You think one of them would leave?" Salvatore smiled without humor. "That's what I need to know." He rose, walking to the window. The city lights flickered in the rain. "I want to test them," he said finally. "Not with money, not with promises. I want to see who stays when there's nothing left to gain." Vince hesitated. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Salvatore murmured. "We'll stage something. A kidnapping. Nothing public, nothing messy. Just enough noise to make it believable. I want to see how they react when they think I'm gone." Vince's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't argue. He had followed Salvatore through worse ideas: wars, vendettas, blood debts. This one, at least, didn't involve corpses. "And what then?" he asked. Salvatore's gaze darkened. "Then I'll know who to take with me when I leave this life behind." When Vince left to make arrangements, Salvatore stayed in the dim light, running his fingers across the edge of his desk. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger, a man caught between power and peace. He thought of Lana's laughter, Camille's whispers, Virginia's shy smile. They each represented a world he could choose, but only one of them, he suspected, could follow him beyond it. That night, he visited each woman one last time, quietly, carefully. At Lana's apartment, the air smelled of perfume and vanity. She greeted him in silk and impatience. "You missed dinner again," she said, pouting. "I was busy," he replied. "You're always busy." She trailed her nails along his chest. "When are you going to stop chasing ghosts and start living, Salvatore?" He smiled faintly, thinking she'd never understand. He was trying to stop chasing ghosts by leaving the life that created them. He left her with a kiss that meant nothing and drove into the night. Camille was waiting in a candlelit room. She watched him with quiet eyes, studying his every move. "You're restless," she said. "Maybe I'm just tired." "Tired men are dangerous," he chuckled. "So are curious women." She smiled, but he could tell she was reading between his words, searching for meaning. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. And then, near midnight, he went to the flower shop. The lights were off, but Virginia was inside, arranging blooms by lamplight. She looked up, surprised but smiling. "You again?" she teased softly. "You never come this late." "Couldn't sleep." "Too many thoughts?" He nodded. "Too many ghosts." She tilted her head. "Then maybe you need something alive." She handed him a small potted plant. Green, fragile, persistent. "It's called a peace lily. It only blooms when you take care of it." He held it carefully, feeling a strange weight in his chest. "Thank you, Veggie." "For what?" she asked. "For reminding me that things can still grow." He left the shop with the plant in his hand and the first stirrings of something like hope in his heart. By dawn, the plan was set. Within 48 hours, news would spread through the underworld. Salvatore Rizzo, the king of the city, had been kidnapped. A ransom would be demanded. 3 women would receive the call, and then he would find out who truly loved the man, and who only ever loved the throne. The night before the storm, Salvatore sat in the back of his black sedan, eyes fixed on the city that had made him a god and a ghost at once. The rain hit the windshield in slow, deliberate taps, each drop like a warning. Tomorrow, he would disappear, by his own design. Vince sat in the driver's seat, silent but uneasy. "Everything's set," he said finally. "Your men know their roles. The ransom message goes out at dawn." Salvatore nodded once. "No mistakes." Vince glanced at him through the mirror. "You're sure about this, boss? You really want to test them like this?" Salvatore's voice was low, cold, and tired. "I've spilled enough blood to know that loyalty fades faster than love. I want to see if love still exists at all." He stepped out of the car into the rain, the city's neon lights flickering against the wet pavement. Somewhere out there were 3 women, each claiming to love him, each wrapped in her own truth. By the time the sun rose 3 times, he would know which one had a soul strong enough to follow him out of hell. At dawn, the plan began. One of his trusted lieutenants, Matteo, leaked the story in whispers to the underworld. A rival ambush, Salvatore Rizzo taken, no witnesses. A ransom note appeared on his office desk an hour later, authored by his own men, but convincing enough to fool the world. 3 million euros, 3 days, or the boss dies. The calls went out, one by one. The first went to Lana. She was lounging in silk sheets when her phone rang. Her fingers, still glittering with diamonds he'd given her, answered lazily. "Who is this?" A man's voice, tense and unfamiliar. "Lana, listen carefully. Salvatore's been taken. We have 3 days to get him back alive." Her laughter came first, sharp, nervous, disbelieving. "Taken? By who? That's ridiculous. He's Salvatore Rizzo. Nobody takes him." "This is real," the voice insisted. "He needs your help. Money. Fast." Her face stiffened. "Money?" "Yes. You can reach the account through—" She hung up before he could finish. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. If he was truly gone, what would that mean for her? The bodyguards, the cars, the lavish parties, all gone. Her eyes darkened. She opened her closet and began to pack. By the time the second call came, she was already gone. The next call went to Camille. She was sitting on a balcony wrapped in a silk robe, a glass of wine untouched beside her. Her phone buzzed. "Camille," the voice rasped. "It's urgent. The boss has been taken. We're working to free him, but we need your help." She said nothing for a long time. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Who's behind it?" "We don't know yet. Could be Dante's men." At the mention of her secret lover's name, her pulse quickened. Dante. She had fed him whispers about Salvatore for years, tiny scraps of information that never seemed to hurt the man she was supposed to destroy. But now, if he truly was gone, Maybe Dante's patience had ended. Maybe this was his doing. "I can't get involved," she said finally, her tone flat. "Camille, please, he's in danger." Her gaze drifted to the city below, to the lights reflecting off wet rooftops. "If he's really in danger, he'll save himself. He always does." And she ended the call. A moment later, her phone buzzed again, this time from Dante. She quickly told him about the news and asked if he had a hand in it. He said no, and simply told her to stay away from the case. That if he was kidnapped, it's a good thing. It's someone else doing what he's always wanted to do. And it doesn't matter who takes Rizzo down. He just wants him down. Her hand trembled slightly. She deleted the messages. She told herself she didn't care. But for the first time, she wasn't sure. The final call went to Virginia. She was at the flower shop, her hands stained with soil, the scent of lilies thick in the air. When the phone rang, she wiped her palms nervously before answering. "Virginia," a man's voice said. "It's Vince." Her heart stilled. "Vince? Why are you—" "There's no time. Salvatore's been taken. They want a ransom. 3 million. We're trying to gather funds, but it's not enough. He needs help. He needs you." The world tilted. "Taken?" she whispered. "Where?" "We don't know. They said 3 days." She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was trembling. "How can I help?" "There's an account. Anything you can give. Anything at all." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked around her small apartment above the shop, a modest life, full of things that meant little except for one. In a small wooden box on her dresser lay her mother's necklace, delicate gold with a tiny sapphire, the only heirloom she'd ever owned. She opened the box, fingers shaking, and held it against her palm. It was worth everything she had. By nightfall, the necklace was gone. She sold it quietly to a jeweler downtown, tears burning her cheeks as she watched it disappear from her hand. By midnight, she wired every cent to the account Vince had given. For 3 days, the city whispered of Salvatore Rizzo's fall. His rivals grew bold, his allies nervous. Some said he was dead already. Some said he was being tortured in a warehouse by Dante's men. But Virginia refused to believe it. Each night, she lit a candle in her shop window and whispered his name into the silence. "Come back," she prayed. "Please." 3 days later, the news broke. The boss had been found alive. Rumors spread that the ransom had been paid and the kidnappers scattered. His men released him at dawn, bruised but breathing. In truth, Salvatore had spent those 3 days in a safe house across the river, watching every reaction from afar. Vince brought him reports each night. Lana's flight, Camille's silence, Virginia's sacrifice. When Vince told him about the necklace, her mother's necklace, Salvatore had said nothing for a long while. He simply sat there staring out the window, jaw tight, a single muscle ticking beneath his cheek. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Vince had ever heard. "She gave up the only piece of her past to save me." Vince nodded. "She didn't even ask where to send the money, just did it." Salvatore closed his eyes. For the first time in years, something inside him shifted. Guilt, perhaps, or something dangerously close to love. He exhaled slowly. "Prepare the car. I'm going home." By the next morning, the streets buzzed with disbelief. Salvatore Rizzo, the king no one could kill, had returned from the dead. His enemies fell silent. His allies celebrated. But only he knew the truth. The test was complete. One woman fled for comfort. One woman stayed silent in betrayal. And one woman, who had nothing to gain, gave up everything. He had his answer. The night he returned, the city held its breath. Word of Salvatore Rizzo's reappearance spread like wildfire through the streets. The whispers, the disbelief, the awe. The king had survived. Again. But this time, there was no celebration in his heart. The mansion that once pulsed with life, with music, with laughter, with fear, now stood silent as a tomb. The grand chandeliers burned low, their light trembling against the marble floors. Outside, the storm gathered, as if the heavens themselves waited for his judgment. Vince stood near the window, arms folded, watching his boss pour a glass of whiskey that he didn't drink. The silence stretched thin. "You really want to do this?" Vince asked quietly. Salvatore's eyes never lifted. "I need to look them in the eye. And when you do, then I'll know who to walk away with and who to bury in memory." Vince nodded, his jaw tightening. "They'll be here within the hour." When he left, Salvatore stood alone in the vast hall. He could almost hear the ghosts of his past echoing through the walls. Laughter, gunfire, promises broken under chandeliers just like these. He straightened his cufflinks, smoothed his tie, and took a slow breath. Tonight was not about power. It was about truth. The first to arrive was Camille. She walked in wearing black, her beauty sharp as a blade, her posture defiant, but her eyes flickering with unease. She stopped a few paces away from him. "You're alive," she said, her voice steady, but her fingers trembled against her clutch. "I am," Salvatore replied evenly. "You sound disappointed." Her lips parted, but no words came. He smiled faintly. "Sit." The second to enter was Lana. She'd been found and escorted back by Salvatore's men, furious at the intrusion but too afraid to resist. She entered like a storm of perfume and resentment, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "I don't appreciate being dragged here," she snapped. Salvatore's gaze lifted to her, cold and unreadable. "And I don't appreciate being abandoned." Her mouth opened, ready to protest, but his eyes silenced her. Then came Virginia. She hesitated at the threshold, the rain behind her catching the light. Her dress was simple, her hair damp from the storm. She looked out of place in this world of marble and menace, fragile yet unbroken. When she met Salvatore's gaze, her breath caught. He was alive. Bruised, yes, his jaw shadowed with healing cuts, his eyes rimmed with fatigue, but alive. "Come in," he said softly. She stepped forward, the sound of her small footsteps echoing across the hall. The room fell silent. 3 women, 1 man. Salvatore turned, his figure commanding under the chandelier. The whiskey in his hand glinted gold, but his voice was ice. "When I disappeared," he began, "I wanted to see the truth. Not the one you whisper to me at night. Not the one you dress up with smiles and perfume. The real one. The one that shows when everything else burns away." His eyes moved from Lana to Camille, then finally to Virginia. He set the glass down slowly. 3 days, that's all I was gone. 3 days, and the masks fell off. Lana's chin lifted, defiant. Camille sat motionless, her eyes shadowed. Virginia stood silent, hands clasped together, trembling slightly. Salvatore stepped closer. "Lana," he said first, his tone deceptively gentle. "You fled before the first sunrise, packed your bags and vanished. No calls, no messages, no loyalty, just silence." Lana flushed, her eyes flashing. "What was I supposed to do? You're the one who surrounded yourself with enemies. I didn't sign up to die for you." He tilted his head, his expression almost pitying. "No, you didn't. You signed up to be seen beside me, to shine when I shone, and to disappear when the lights went out." She looked away. He turned next to Camille. "And you," he said quietly. "You didn't run. You didn't even pretend to care. You just waited." Her lips curved faintly. "You think I didn't know it was a setup? You've tested everyone, Salvatore. I wasn't going to play the fool." His gaze sharpened. "You knew," he said, "and you still did nothing." Camille's fingers tightened around her clutch. "You wanted truth? That's mine. I don't beg for anyone. Not even the man who might have died for you." Her jaw clenched. "You wouldn't die for anyone." A heavy silence followed. Then Salvatore turned to the last woman, the quiet one who had never asked him for anything. "Virginia," he said softly. Her name in his voice sounded like a confession. She looked up, her eyes wide. "You sold your mother's necklace," he continued. "The only thing you had left of her. You didn't ask questions, you didn't hesitate. You just gave." She swallowed hard. "You were in danger. What else could I do?" "You could have done what everyone else did," he said. "Walked away." "I couldn't." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You've given so much to people who didn't deserve it. I couldn't be one of them." The room was still. Salvatore looked between them all, the glittering shell of Lana, the shadowed cunning of Camille, the trembling light of Virginia. Then he spoke, his words low but final. "Two of you vanished. One of you gave everything she had. That's the woman I'm keeping." Lana's face went pale. "You're making a mistake." Camille's mask cracked. "You think she loves you? You think this little girl even understands you?" Salvatore turned to her, his tone unreadable. "Maybe not. But she doesn't have to. She just sees me." Virginia's breath hitched. "Salvatore." He looked at her, and for the first time in years, his eyes softened. "You don't need to say anything, Veggie. You already did." Camille rose suddenly, her chair scraping the marble. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice trembling between fury and heartbreak. "You think she's different? She's not. You'll see." Her words echoed as she stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Lana followed, silent now, her eyes empty of charm. When the hall was finally quiet again, Salvatore turned to Virginia. She stood frozen, tears in her eyes, her hands shaking. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed the sapphire necklace, cleaned, repaired, and gleaming softly in the low light. Gently, he placed it in her palm. "What you gave away to save me," he murmured, "comes back to you now." He held her gently. "You don't belong in this world," he said. "But somehow, you became the only good thing in it." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The rain beat harder against the windows like applause from the heavens. He stepped closer, the stormlight flickering across his face. Without another word, Salvatore cupped her jaw and kissed her, slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that carried both apology and promise. For the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't power. It was peace. He exhaled, the weight of years leaving his chest. "It's over, no more pretending." She looked up at him, this man of shadows and scars, and saw not the Mafia king, but the weary soul beneath. And in that moment, even as thunder rolled across the sky, peace entered the house of Salvatore Rizzo for the first time. The mansion's silence stretched into days after the confrontation. Camille hadn't slept. Every echo in the hall was a reminder of the moment she lost control, the moment she saw Virginia's face illuminated in the chandelier's glow, the face of a woman who had been chosen instead of her. The humiliation burned deeper than any wound she'd ever carried. It wasn't just rejection, it was exposure. For years, Camille had balanced on the knife's edge between two kings. Salvatore Rizzo, the empire she couldn't conquer, and Dante, the rival who had once owned her loyalty and her fear. Now, her double life teetered on the brink. She sat in her apartment that night, the city lights flickering beyond the windows, the air thick with cigarette smoke and shame. Her reflection stared back from the glass, flawless on the outside, fractured within. It had begun years ago. Flashback. 5 years. Earlier. The first time Camille met Dante, he had smiled like a man who already owned her. "You want power?" he had asked, pouring her a drink. "You want purpose? Then you'll help me take down Rizzo." Back then, Dante was nothing more than an ambitious shadow. Elegant, patient, cruel. His war with Salvatore was a quiet one, fought not with bullets, but with whispers, money, and manipulation. And Camille, beautiful and clever, was his perfect weapon. "You'll be his comfort," Dante had said, tracing a finger across her cheek. "His mirror, his distraction. Learn his habits, his allies, his weaknesses. Every man has one, even Rizzo." So she had done exactly that. She had entered Salvatore's world like a ghost, a lover who appeared in his orbit at just the right moment, who listened more than she spoke, who built her place in his life with patience and lies. But Salvatore Rizzo had been a fortress. He never bragged, never drank enough to talk, never slept long enough to dream out loud. His mind was a locked vault, his trust a riddle no one had solved. She played her role with precision, the charming confidant, the dangerous beauty, yet for every step she took closer, he took one back. And somewhere along the line, frustration turned into something far more dangerous: obsession. She started watching him not for information, but for understanding. The way he moved through rooms like a ghost who owned the world. The quiet gentleness that slipped through his violence when he thought no one was watching. Dante's phone calls had grown colder over time. "Anything new?" "He keeps everything in his head," she'd replied. "There's nothing to give you." "Then make him talk." But she couldn't. The more she tried, the more she realized she didn't want to see him fall. And Dante, perceptive, patient, had begun to suspect it. Present day. Now, sitting in the dark, Camille could still hear Salvatore's voice in her mind. "Two of you vanished. One of you gave everything she had. That's the woman I'm keeping." The words replayed like a wound reopening. She gripped her phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Dante's number was still memorized. She hadn't called him in weeks, not since he'd told her that Rizzo was growing soft. That love had started to rot the edges of his empire. And now, maybe he was right. She hesitated for a long time, her thumb hovering over the screen. The thought of betraying Salvatore again, truly betraying him, made her stomach twist. But the jealousy, the humiliation, the raw ache of losing to Virginia's innocence clawed through her restraint. Finally, she pressed the button. The line clicked. A familiar voice answered, smooth as silk. "Camille." Her breath hitched. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Dante said. She could almost hear the smile. "I heard Rizzo crawled back from the grave. I assume you had a front row seat." Her nails dug into her palm. "He's different." "How so?" "He's losing focus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not the same man. He's planning something. Something big. He's distracted. Weak." There was silence on the other end. Then Dante's tone shifted, colder, hungrier. "Careless men are easy to kill." Camille swallowed hard. "That's not what I meant. I just thought you should know—" "Camille," he interrupted, his voice dark velvet over steel. "You've done your part. I'll handle the rest." Her pulse quickened. "What are you going to do?" The line went dead. The silence afterward was deafening. Camille lowered the phone, her heart thudding against her ribs. She'd meant to wound him, not destroy him. She'd wanted to shake the world he'd built, not end it. But deep down, she knew Dante. He didn't believe in half measures. And now, she'd handed him the weapon he'd been waiting for. That same night, Dante moved faster than anyone could have predicted. In his private club, a den of smoke, glass, and leather, he stood before his lieutenants, his expression serene. "Rizzo thinks he can vanish," he said. "He thinks love makes him untouchable. Let's remind him what power really is." Orders were given. Routes were mapped. By midnight, a team of Dante's best men rolled through the rain-soaked streets toward the edge of the city. Inside a black van, rifles gleamed under dim light. The leader of the crew checked his watch. Boss wants him alive? For now, came the reply. No one questioned why. They knew Dante's style. He preferred his revenge slow. By the time dawn brushed over the horizon, the trap was already in motion. Salvatore's car would be intercepted en route to a quiet meeting on the docks. A handful of guards. No backup. No chance to fight back. The real kidnapping would happen so smoothly, no one would realize it wasn't staged. And miles away, Camille sat by her window, her stomach knotted, her mind echoing with regret. She tried to convince herself that she hadn't condemned him, that Dante wouldn't go that far. But the truth was written across every rain-soaked street, every shadow that moved beneath the city lights. Dante would never settle for humiliation. He would only settle for victory. And before the sun set again, Salvatore Rizzo, the man she'd once been sent to destroy and somehow fallen in love with, would be taken for real. This time, there would be no staged escape, no safety net, no mercy. The morning was too calm, too bright. The kind of day that made even the hardest men forget danger could still be hiding in the sunlight. Salvatore Rizzo didn't trust it. He sat in the back seat of a sleek black car, flanked by only two of his most loyal men. For once, there was no convoy, no escort of motorcycles trailing behind. He wanted to keep a low profile. One last meeting before he left the country for good. The less attention, the better. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. "You sure about this, boss? No backup?" Salvatore adjusted his cufflinks, the gesture slow, deliberate. "I'm sure. If I can't move through my own city unseen, I was never free to begin with." He didn't know that freedom would be snatched from him within the hour. The city blurred by in streaks of gray and silver. The car turned off the main road, heading toward the dockyards, a place quiet enough to think, forgotten enough to hide. And that was when it happened. Two black vans appeared out of nowhere, swerving in from both sides. Tires screamed against the asphalt. The driver shouted, slamming the brakes. The sound of metal grinding filled the air. "Boss!" Gunfire ripped through the silence. Glass shattered. Bullets tore through the bodyguards before they could draw their weapons. Blood sprayed across the dash. Salvatore ducked instinctively, hand reaching for the pistol at his side. But a shadow appeared at the window, a gloved hand smashing through the glass, a gun pressed to his temple. "End of the line, King!" a voice hissed. Rough hands yanked him out of the car. His head hit the pavement hard enough to blur his vision. The last thing he saw before they dragged him into the van was the crimson smear of his driver's hand sliding down the car door. Inside the van, the air was suffocating. A burlap sack covered his head. Ropes bit into his wrists. Every bump in the road felt like a hammer against his ribs. He tried to speak, but someone struck him in the stomach with the butt of a rifle. "Quiet, old man," one of them spat. "You'll get your turn to talk." When the van finally stopped, they dragged him into what smelled like damp concrete, an abandoned warehouse by the sound of dripping pipes and distant machinery. They tied him to a metal post, ripping the sack from his head. Light burned his eyes. There were 4 of them. Rough, faceless men. Dante's men. He knew their type. Not the kind who killed cleanly. The kind who liked to play. One of them crouched before him, grinning. "You're tougher than they said. Let's see how long that lasts." Salvatore spat blood onto the floor. "If Dante sent you, tell him to come himself." The man laughed and stood. "He will. But first, he wanted us to make sure you look like what you are. Finished." They hit him again, and again. Each blow echoed through the empty room. His ribs cracked, his lips split, but his eyes never closed. Even in blood, he stayed calculating. He counted their steps, measured the rhythm of their patrols, listened to the way the floor creaked beneath their boots. If they left him breathing, he'd find a way to make them regret it. Back at the mansion, the clock ticked past noon. The halls were quiet, but Virginia felt it before anyone said a word. The shift in the air, the hollow stillness. She had been arranging lilies in the hall, her hands steady until they weren't. The scent of them, so clean and sweet, suddenly felt wrong. She looked at the door. No guards, no cars, no sound of his footsteps. She called his phone once, twice, then a third time. No answer. By evening, her calm had vanished. She went to Vince's office, but he was gone, out handling errands for Salvatore's planned departure. She was alone. Hours passed. The sky darkened. Every tick of the clock scraped against her nerves. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Then, without warning, the heavy front doors burst open. Camille stormed in like a tempest, her heels striking the marble like gunfire. Her face was wild, her eyes red. "You knew, didn't you?" she shouted, voice trembling with fury. "You knew he was leaving." Virginia blinked, startled. "Camille, what are you talking about? You think he chose you because of love?" Camille spat. "He's using you, and now look where that's gotten him." Virginia's heart stumbled. "Where is he?" Camille laughed bitterly. "You really don't know?" "I said—" Virginia's voice cracked. "Where is he?" The air between them ignited. Heartbreak, meeting, heartbreak. Virginia stepped forward. "If you came here to hurt me, you're wasting your breath. Just tell me what you know." Camille's expression twisted. All her fury, all her jealousy, all her guilt collided into one breaking point. And then it happened. The slip she didn't mean to make. "He's gone!" Camille shouted. "Your precious boss, kidnapped for real this time." The words hung in the air like gunfire. Virginia froze, her hands trembling around the edge of the table. "What did you say?" Camille's eyes widened, realizing too late what she'd revealed. "Forget it." She turned, heading for the door. Virginia caught her arm. "Camille, please. Who took him?" Camille yanked free, her voice shaking. "You wouldn't understand. Just pray he's still alive." The sound of her heels faded down the corridor. The housekeepers had gathered at the commotion. They rushed to Virginia's side as she stood in the center of the hall, pale and shaking. "Miss Virginia," one of them whispered, "should we call the police?" She shook her head slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "No, the police can't help a man like him." Her chest heaved as realization sank in. This wasn't another test. This wasn't a lie or a trick. This was real. The king who had once ruled the underworld had vanished into its shadows. And Virginia, the quiet woman who had loved him beyond reason, could feel the world she knew collapsing around her. She clutched the small sapphire pendant he had returned to her days earlier, a promise now turned into a curse of silence, and whispered to the empty hall, "Please, Salvatore, come back to me." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The storm had not stopped since the night Salvatore vanished. It raged over the city like a curse that refused to lift. Inside the mansion, every window trembled with wind. Every shadow felt too long. Virginia sat by the grand staircase, her phone clutched in her shaking hand. Her lips moved in silent prayers that sounded more like pleas. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Then, with a breath that felt like breaking glass, she pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Then a voice came through, rough, familiar, and steady as stone. "Vince," she nearly choked. "Vince, it's me." The sound of her voice made the line still. "Virginia? What's happened?" "He's gone," she whispered. "Salvatore's been taken. Camille." She said it. "It's true." For a moment, there was silence. Not disbelief, but deadly calm. Then the faint rustle of movement. Boots on floor, the slide of a suitcase snapped shut. "I'm on my way," he said. 4 hours later, by dawn, a private jet cut through the clouds, landing at the edge of the city. Vince stepped off, his jaw set, his eyes cold enough to cut through steel. He hadn't slept. His face carried the exhaustion of a man who had lived through too many wars and lost too many brothers. His car was already waiting. By the time he reached the mansion, the men were standing in the courtyard. The old guard, what was left of them. The rest were either dead, bought, or hiding. Virginia stood at the top of the steps, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. When she saw him, her composure cracked. "Vince." He went straight to her, steadying her by the shoulders. "When?" "I don't know, but I haven't heard from him since yesterday. And Camille? Camille came here later in the evening. She knew. She said he was kidnapped. Then she left." Vince's eyes darkened. "She's not getting far." Within an hour, the mansion was alive again. Cars roaring out the gates, engines echoing through the streets. The old network came back to life like blood rushing into a sleeping beast. Vince stood in the war room, the dim light flickering over maps, red markers, and the metallic scent of ammunition. "Track her," he ordered. "Every known contact, every property she ever touched. She knows something. She's the link." Virginia hovered near the door, her hands clasped tightly. "You think she'll talk?" "She'll scream if she doesn't." By nightfall, they found her. Camille had gone to ground in one of Dante's old safe houses, a high-rise apartment overlooking the river, too quiet for comfort. The team moved in without sound, cutting the power before she knew they were there. She was pouring herself a drink when the door burst open. The glass shattered on the floor. "Vince," she breathed, stepping back. He entered like a storm, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence alone enough to silence her. Two men flanked him, weapons drawn, but not fired. "Don't," she whispered. "I didn't. Where is he?" Vince's voice was a low growl. "I don't know." He slammed a hand on the table. "Don't lie to me, Camille." Her breath caught. The room trembled with his fury. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice breaking. "I just told Dante he was distracted. That's all. I didn't think he'd actually—" Vince stepped closer. "You thought Dante wouldn't act on blood?" She turned away, shaking. "He said he just wanted leverage. He said—" He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You're going to take us to him." Camille's eyes glistened. "You'll never make it out alive. His compound's a fortress." Vince released her with a shove. "Then we die trying. But you're coming with us." They drove in silence. Camille sat in the back seat, hands trembling on her lap, guilt coiling through every breath she took. She could see Virginia's reflection in the window, pale, determined, her eyes full of something more dangerous than hate. Love turned fearless. Vince drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his gun. His gaze stayed fixed ahead. "Tell me everything," he said. Camille swallowed. "The compound's outside the city near the old quarry. There's an underground tunnel system. Only Dante's men know the codes. He keeps his prisoners there before he makes them disappear." "How many guards?" "At least 20, maybe more." Vince's grip tightened on the wheel. "Then we'll bring 30. An hour later, they reached the ridge overlooking the rival's estate. Floodlights sliced through the darkness, casting sharp beams across the courtyard. The sound of engines, laughter, and faint music echoed from below. Through binoculars, Vince scanned the perimeter, watchtowers, patrols, armored trucks. It was exactly as Camille said, a fortress. But his gaze didn't waver. "He's in there." Camille looked down, her voice trembling. "You don't understand, Vince. Dante doesn't just kill, he breaks people. Piece by piece." Vince turned to her. "Then we'll break him first." Virginia stepped forward, her shawl fluttering in the cold wind. "What if we don't make it?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, his expression softened. "You think he'd forgive us if we didn't try?" She nodded once. That was enough. The plan unfolded quickly. 2 teams. One from the east gate, one from the underground tunnel Camille had described. Vince would lead the assault himself. Virginia would stay behind with a radio, the voice that kept them grounded. Camille hesitated by the car, watching the men load weapons and silencers. Her stomach churned with fear. Vince caught her arm. "You want to make it right? Then don't run." Her voice cracked. "I'm not running." "Good. Because when this is over," he said coldly, "you'll answer to him." She looked down, her eyes wet. "If he's still alive?" Vince's stare hardened. "He's alive." He turned to his men. "We move at midnight." As the last sliver of moonlight slipped behind the clouds, silence fell over the quarry. Engines went off. Doors opened softly. Virginia sat in the car, the radio pressed to her ear, listening to the static hum of danger. Every passing minute felt like a century. Then Vince's voice came through, low and steady. "We're in." She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer she didn't know she remembered. "Bring him back," she breathed. "Please, bring him back." The line went quiet. Then the first gunshot cracked through the night. The sound of gunfire ripped through the night, echoing through the open radio line. Virginia froze. The rain hammered against the windshield, the radio crackling with chaos. Voices shouted. Engines roared. Then, another explosion. "Vince!" she screamed into the receiver. "What's happening?" Static answered her. Then, Vince's voice, low, urgent, breathless. "We're in! Stay on the line, Veggie. Whatever happens, don't hang up." She pressed the radio to her chest, whispering a prayer. "Please, Salvatore, be alive." Inside the compound, hell had arrived. Vince's men stormed through the gates under a storm of bullets. Smoke and sparks filled the air, turning the night into a nightmare of flashing lights and screaming metal. The rain hissed as it hit the fire erupting from the vehicles. "Move! Move!" Vince bellowed, cutting through the chaos, his rifle steady as he led the charge. The men advanced through the courtyard, dropping guards one by one, their black gear vanishing into the shadows. The rivals' soldiers fought back hard, pouring gunfire from the balconies, shouting orders over the roar of rain. And deep beneath all that chaos, below the floors of blood and smoke, Salvatore Rizzo stirred. He sat against a damp wall, wrists bound in chains slick with his own blood. Every breath burned. His ribs screamed with pain. But his eyes, sharp, alive, stayed fixed on the door. The guards outside were laughing, voices muffled through the metal. "He's finished," one said. "Boss says let him rot till morning. Then we show the world the king's no god." Salvatore tilted his head, listening, counting. 1, 2. Maybe 3 steps between them. He studied the key ring that dangled from the belt of the nearest guard every time he passed the cell door. Timing was everything. When the next blast shook the walls, he moved. He lunged forward, wrapping the chain around the guard's neck through the bars, pulling with a strength born from fury. The man's body hit the steel with a dull thud. Keys clattered to the ground. Within seconds, Salvatore was free. Gunfire echoed above him, shouts, screams, the thunder of boots. He grabbed a pistol from the fallen guard and moved through the underground tunnels, every muscle burning, every step purposeful. When he reached the stairwell, he could see flashes of light through the cracks in the ceiling, flickers of war. He climbed, slowly, carefully. The closer he got, the louder it became. The smell of gunpowder filled his lungs. When he reached the final door, he kicked it open, and chaos swallowed him whole. The courtyard was fire and rain, bodies, smoke, bullets flying through the air like angry wasps. Salvatore didn't wait to think. He fired as he moved, taking cover behind fallen crates, his aim precise, his steps silent. Men who had laughed at his capture fell before they even saw his face. Through the storm, Vince spotted him. "Boss!" Salvatore turned just in time to see his old friend cutting through the chaos toward him, flanked by their men. Relief flickered in Vince's eyes, swift, fleeting. "You're alive," Vince breathed. Salvatore smirked faintly through the blood. Not for long if we keep talking. They fought side by side, the way they once had years ago, clean, ruthless, unyielding. The kind of violence that left no doubt who ruled the underworld. And yet, amidst the gunfire and smoke, something else moved. Her. Camille. She stood near the hallway entrance, watching him. Her heart twisted. This was not how she'd imagined seeing him again. He looked like a ghost. Bloodied, furious, unstoppable, and still, somehow, heartbreakingly human. She raised her gun to help the men, firing at one of Dante's guards who was sneaking up from behind Vince. Her shot was clean. Her hands trembled. She had betrayed him once. This was all she could offer now. But fate was not done with her yet. Through the rising smoke, she caught a glint of silver, a sniper rifle, aimed directly at Salvatore's back. Her breath caught. The rival's soldier had him in his sights. For a moment, Camille hesitated. She could run. She could hide. No one would blame her. But her body moved before her mind could stop it. Salvatore! He turned, eyes flashing in recognition. Just as the shot fired, the bullet hit her instead. The world slowed. Camille stumbled forward, eyes wide, a bloom of red spreading across her chest. She dropped the gun and collapsed. Salvatore caught her before she hit the ground, his hands trembling as he pulled her close. No, he rasped. No, no, no. Vince quickly shot the guy down before he could make another hit. She smiled weakly, blood staining her lips. I never meant for it to go this far. His chest tightened. The words came like confession, like penance. Rain fell harder, mingling with her tears and his. Her hand lifted, shaking, brushing his cheek. I thought I could destroy you, but you were the only one who ever saw me. Camille. His voice broke. Don't speak. Too late, she whispered, her smile fading. I finally did something right. Her eyes glazed, her body going limp in his arms. Salvatore held her, his breath shallow, his face carved in agony. The weapon had become human, just too late to be saved. From across the courtyard, Dante, the rival boss, stepped into view. Smoke curled around him, his coat flapping in the wind. His gun gleamed beneath the broken floodlight. Well, he said coldly, the king of the streets reduced to a man holding corpses. How poetic. Salvatore laid Camille gently on the ground. He rose, eyes burning, rain dripping from his jaw. You talk too much, Dante smirked, raising his weapon. And you love too easily. The world held its breath. A flash of light. One shot, then silence. Dante staggered, eyes wide, a single bullet hole in his chest. His weapon clattered to the ground as he fell backward into the fire behind him. Flames swallowed him whole. Vince rushed forward, gun still raised. Boss! But Salvatore didn't answer. He stood over Camille's body, the rain washing blood from his hands, his face unreadable. Virginia's voice burst through the radio, breaking, desperate. Salvatore! Please answer me, Salvatore! He pressed the radio to his lips, voice hoarse. It's over. And for the first time, he sounded free. The first light of dawn crept across the skyline, bleeding over smoke and ruin. What had once been a fortress of iron and greed now lay in ashes. Walls collapsed, embers glowing like dying stars. Salvatore Rizzo stood in the middle of it all. His white shirt was torn, stained with blood and soot. The air was thick with the scent of burnt fuel, rain, and death. Around him, the last echoes of the gunfire had faded, replaced by the hollow crackle of flames eating through the remains of Dante's empire. He didn't move. He just stared at the rising sun as if it were the first he'd ever seen. Every ghost he'd made seemed to whisper through the smoke. Men who'd followed him, enemies he'd buried, lovers who'd tried to own him. It all felt distant now, meaningless. Behind him, footsteps splashed through shallow puddles. A voice called his name, breathless, trembling, real. Salvatore! He turned. Virginia was running toward him, her hair soaked, her face streaked with tears and rain. She stumbled once, then kept going until she crashed into his chest, arms locking around him like she'd found the only solid thing left in the world. He caught her, holding her tight, burying his face in her hair. "It's done," he murmured against her ear. "Everything that kept me here, it's gone." She pulled back, looking up at him through tears. "You're bleeding." "I've been worse," he said with a faint smile, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "But I'm alive, and so are you." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was the kind that didn't need to be filled. It simply existed, carrying everything words couldn't. Then, slowly, Salvatore reached inside his jacket. Virginia stiffened. "Salvatore." But instead of a weapon, he pulled out something small, silver, gleaming faintly through the smoke. A ring. He held it between his fingers, eyes softening as the dawn caught its edge. "You sold your mother's necklace to save me," he said quietly. "It was all you had left. Let me give you something to keep forever." Her breath caught. "Salvatore." He took her hand gently. His skin was rough, his knuckles still red from the fight, but his touch was careful, reverent. He knelt. Right there in the ruins of the life he'd built, among the ashes of everything he once ruled, the king of the streets went to his knees before the only woman who'd ever seen him as a man. "Marry me, Veggie," he said, voice low, breaking on her name. "Let's leave this city. The guns, the ghosts, all of it. Just you and me." Her tears came freely now, falling onto his hand. She didn't need time to think. She didn't need words. She nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "before the world finds another reason to take you from me." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. When she looked at it, it wasn't the sparkle she saw, but the man behind it. Bruised, scarred, and finally free. They left that night. No guards, no cars, no empire. Only two people walking through the wreckage toward a future neither had ever dared to imagine. Vince stayed behind to clean what remained, to make sure the past stayed buried. He didn't try to stop them. He simply watched them go, knowing this was how it had to end. As they reached the coast, the rain softened into a mist. The air smelled of salt and freedom. A small fishing boat waited where the river met the sea. Its old captain said nothing, just nodded once as Salvatore helped Virginia aboard. When they pushed away from the shore, the city faded behind them, its towers mere shadows in the fog. Virginia sat beside him, her hand still in his, the ring catching the faint light of dawn. He looked at her and smiled. A quiet, tired smile that belonged not to a boss, but to a man reborn. "For once," he said, voice rough with peace. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let's make it something worth waking up for." The waves carried them forward, slow and steady. By sunrise, they had crossed the border into a world that didn't know their names. No sirens, no guns, no debts to pay. Only the sound of the sea and the promise of a beginning, written in silence. Weeks later, in a quiet coastal village far from the chaos of their past, everything Vince had arranged when he was aware of his boss plans was there. New passports, new names, a small seaside cottage under the alias Mr. and Mrs. Moretti. Even the neighbors believed they had always belonged there. Vince had vanished back into the shadows after handing Salvatore the documents. "You earned this," he'd said quietly. "Live the life the rest of us couldn't." It was the last thing he ever said to his boss. Now, the man once called Salvatore Rizzo lived without bodyguards or blood on his hands. He woke each day to the sound of waves, not gunfire. Sometimes, Virginia still startled awake at night, half expecting to hear sirens or footsteps outside. But when she opened her eyes, she always found him beside her, breathing softly, arm draped protectively over her waist. He was no longer the king of the streets. He was a man reborn, quiet, steady, and alive. At dawn, he often stood by the window, watching the light spill across the water. He no longer counted bodies. He counted heartbeats. And every time the sun touched Virginia's sleeping face, he remembered the truth that had saved him. Power fades. Love endures. Do you believe a man who's lived his whole life in darkness can truly start over for love? Tell me below. Would you have followed Salvatore into that quiet world, or stayed behind to rule the ashes?